Let me pitch you two anime. The first is a generic isekai shonen with an overpowered main character who saves the day and gets the girl, despite being a bland self-insert power trip character. The second is an episodic road narrative set in a unique world where the main character passes through the lives of others one at a time, helping them with their problems before moving along, with each episode showing us a different side of the world in question. Now, what if I told you that with both of those, I was describing Sword Art Online? But Spoons, I hear you say. You can't just pretend that SAO isn't an action series and that it sits somewhere in the same vein as Mushishi or Kino's Journey. It is an action series. To which I respond, says who? Are you really gonna let the tags on my anime list tell you how to live your life? Our preconceived notions of genre have an absolutely staggering impact on our understanding of works throughout media. In fact, many of us base what we're going to watch every season solely on the genre tags, because we have certain expectations of what shows in that genre are going to do. And while that's certainly a valid approach, it's hardly the only approach. By abandoning notions of what a show needs to do in order to fulfill its role in a genre, we open up new possibilities for understanding and enjoying anime. And to illustrate this, I'm going to use everyone's favorite / least favorite trash isekai power fantasy, Sword Art Online. Part of the reason that I want to use SAO as an example for this is because most people have seen it and can follow along. But I also chose this because I had a unique experience while watching it and something that I think relates to this theme. SAO wasn't the first time I'd encountered anime. I'd read some manga, I'd seen a couple of anime at the recommendation of my friends, and when I was younger I watched some shonens like Dragon Ball Z and Naruto. But I really wasn't aware of the industry at large or the culture surrounding it, and I'd always thought of the anime that my friends had recommended to me just as shows that my friends had recommended to me. By the time I decided that I really wanted to get into anime, SAO was at the peak hype after its release. So naturally, that's the anime I decided to start with. Because I wasn't aware of the tropes of the medium or really anything about SAO, the show that I saw was the second one that I described in this video's opening. It was a show that really didn't focus too much on developing its protagonist save for the first and final few episodes, because he really wasn't the point. Further, the intricacies of living in a video game weren't fleshed out all that much because that also wasn't the point. The show was, to me, a series of individual vignettes of characters struggling to cope with the world they've found themselves thrust into, and grappling with that reality in their own ways through their brief interactions with the wandering black swordsman. That isn't to say I thought the show was fantastic. Clearly, I'm only talking about the Aincrad arc, so that must tell you what I thought of the rest of the series. But as an introduction to the world of anime, it was far from horrible. So imagine my confusion when the hate train for the show started a little while later. Popular arguments against the show at the time were that Kirito didn't really do anything to earn his powers, we didn't follow him as he learned them, and the show jumped around too much to be a proper progression. And none of these quite made sense to me because it felt like they were targeted at a show that wasn't the one that I had watched. Why would the show focus on Kirito developing his strength when the point was single episode stories about other people in the world? If anything, I viewed Kirito as a narrative device that held together otherwise disconnected stories about other people. And of course the plot jumped around. Because Kirito was more of a plot device than a character, following him in real time would have just dragged down the pace of the show. The show needed to jump around to focus on the smaller character stories that occurred. Though this wasn't around for me to compare it to at the time, I would have compared the show structurally to something more like Violet Evergarden. And those were my thoughts at the time. I really felt like I had watched a different show than the people saying these things. And in a way, I did. It wasn't until later, when I better understood the tropes and expectations of certain genres, that I understood that I had been enjoying this anime incorrectly. The aforementioned criticisms make perfect sense and are absolutely valid when you're talking about an action anime. How lame would it have been if Naruto had been condensed to random interactions between Naruto and some side characters, culminating in a confrontation between him and the big bad that he wins with powers that you didn't see him develop? And this is exactly what people saw in SAO because they went in expecting an action series. And rightly so, it says it right there on MAL. This was clearly intended to be an action series. But how much does that intent really matter? There's a popular angle of literary criticism referred to as the death of the author. The argument essentially states that the biography and intent of an author should have absolutely no impact on a reader's interpretation of their work. Further, it argues that focusing on authorial intent can be extremely limiting because it implies that there is a correct reading of a text, a correct way to experience it. Now, this theory has been applied to pretty much every form of media at this point, everything from books to games and yes, even anime. But I'd like to take this theory a step further here. If focusing on the intent of the author can be detrimental because it limits our possible interpretations, I would argue that anything that can limit our interpretations can also safely be thrown out. And very few things alter our expectations of what an anime is going to be and what it is going to do more than its genre. If something is billed as a shonen, you're going to assume that it's going to have climactic fights and power scaling. If something is billed as a romance drama, you assume that it's going to have intertwining character arcs and some advancement of the main couple. Now, this is an effective marketing strategy and a good jumping off point, but clinging to these descriptors too heavily can lead to us judging an anime based on how well it fulfills the tenets of its specific genre, rather than what it does as a standalone entity. Let's try something here. Going back to Naruto as an example, it is completely possible to view the series as a romance. It would just be a really shit romance. Outcast boy meets shy girl, they speak a few times over the next several years, and get married, except there are several hundred episodes of fight scenes in between. Yeah, that isn't great. You could also view SAO as a romance, and while it works a little bit better than Naruto does, it still doesn't have the progression that you would expect from a romance. Placing the limit of the romance genre on my viewing of these shows alters my expectations of what the show is going to do, but it alters them based on my understanding of what the romance genre is supposed to do. While it's obviously more fair for me to base my expectations around the genre the series was supposed to exist within, the same limitations apply. But the limitation of genre is entirely arbitrary because it only exists within our minds. There is no big handbook-o genre. And genre expectations can change rapidly over the course of just a few years. Watch Naruto and My Hero Academia, and then tell me that what appeals to fans of the shonen genre hasn't changed over that period of time. But shows continue to exist long after the climate of genre expectations that they were developed in fades away. How do we look at shows like that? Most people will either judge those shows against modern standards, in which case they'll often come up lacking, or they'll go back and try to position themselves within antiquated genre expectations. While the latter works as sort of a history exercise, it's still just an attempt to shape your expectations before going in, so that you can judge the series based on some objective measure. And I think that's why we cling to genre so much. Genre tells us what to expect from a series so that we know how to feel about it, so that we have some kind of objective standard against which we can judge it. But if the purpose of anime is to experience something, to connect with something, to feel something, then the only standard that we need to measure a series against is this one. Do I enjoy watching this? Genre be damned, expectations be damned. Do I get something out of watching this show? It doesn't matter if you watch it the right way. Hell, if you think watching Haruhi backwards 5 frames at a time is peak entertainment, who am I to tell you that you're wrong? Because at the end of the day, the reason we watch anime is because we enjoy it. When I first got into anime, I had this really horrible app on my phone. It listed a bunch of anime in alphabetical order with a 1-sentence description and no genre tags and no ratings to speak of. I'd go through, I'd look at the cover photos, I'd read the descriptions, and then I'd watch a whole series just based on that. I would have almost no idea what to expect going in, and you know what? During the time I used that app, I saw and connected with more varied series than I ever have since. I'm not saying this is the way to watch anime. I'm not even saying I do this all the time. What I am saying is this: try going into a show blind. Leave your expectations behind and don't think about what a show is supposed to do in its genre. Think about, in the moment, what it is doing for you.